My name is Frances Kamm, and the title of my book is Bioethical Prescriptions. It was published in late 2013 by Oxford University Press. It consists of 27 previously published essays, but heavily revised in order to make a book that's a unified whole. The title of the book plays with the idea of a doctor's prescriptions, only here it's with bioethical content. The book has 5 parts. The first part deals with issues related to death and dying. It begins with a philosophical analysis of Tolstoy's novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and it considers whether the way in which we live our lives affects how we die by considering why Ivan fears death. It also considers general characteristics that philosophers have pointed to that make death bad in relation to Ivan's particular fears. The next few chapters deal with the issue of physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. I first examine a document called the Philosopher's Brief that was submitted by some philosophers to the Supreme Court when it was dealing with this issue. I criticize some of their arguments in favor of physician-assisted suicide and offer a new one of my own in favor of physician-assisted suicide. I also consider whether doctors might actually have a duty rather than merely a permission to assist in suicide. The final chapters in this part deal with the moral permissibility of relying on an advance directive to end life that was written by someone when they were competent for the eventuality of their being demented, and whether we can still apply that advance directive. It also considers whether the so-called brain death criterion of death in common use in the United States is conceptually flawed. The second part of the book deals with early life and the harms that may come to it. First few chapters deal with the moral issues surrounding the destruction of human embryos in order to acquire stem cells for medical purposes. It also considers the moral costs and benefits of alternative means of possibly acquiring human stem cells. The next few chapters deal with abortion and the destruction of fetuses. It first examines the views on this issue of Ronald Dworkin, criticizing some of his views. And then it presents a rather lengthy chapter that deals with whether abortion would be permissible if we assumed, just for the sake of argument, that the fetus was a person. The last chapter in this book, in this section of the book rather, deals with the issue of the detection and prevention of Munchausen syndrome, which is a syndrome in which parents actually harm their own children in medical contexts. The third part of the book deals with issues related to genetics and cloning. It begins with a discussion of whether social justice requires societies to make use of these techniques if they develop to a degree of perfection in order to treat defects, illnesses in people, and also to possibly enhance human beings beyond normal capacities that we see in them now. I also deal with the question of whether parents have obligations to use such techniques to treat and perhaps to enhance the capacities of their children, and in general, what the obligations of parents are to their offspring, not to harm them and also to benefit them. The next chapter deals with the general question of moral status, and it deals with the moral status of being a person in connection with the question of whether it's permissible to clone persons, whether something about their status would make that impermissible. It also deals with the question of whether if we harm a person, there's a difference, morally speaking, between harming them as a result of affecting the embryo from which they will arise, by contrast to harming them once they actually are a person. And I connect this issue up with our question of our obligations to future generations. The last chapter in this part deals with Michael Sandel's criticisms of enhancement and by way of various techniques. I do criticize some of his arguments and consider my own views, present my own views about whether and when and why enhancement might be permissible or impermissible. The fourth part of the book deals with the allocation of scarce resources. It begins with chapters on general issues relating health and equity and equality of opportunity. It also offers proposals for the allocation of scarce medical resources. The following chapters deal with particular issues that face us in allocation. For example, may doctors stop treating a group of people when the use of the medical resource is scarce in order to treat a different group of people where they would succeed to a greater degree? The outcome would be better. Is it the case that the fact that someone has a disability should ever make it likely that they receive less of a chance to acquire a scarce resource than someone who is not disabled? These are some of the particular questions I deal with. And the last chapter in this part of the book deals with whether we can extend the use of principles for the allocation of scarce resources developed for medical contexts to non-medical contexts where resources are also scarce. For example, educational resources and legal services. The last part of the book deals with questions of methodology, namely, what is the relationship between doing moral theory, theorizing about particular moral problems, and actually applying these proposed solutions in the real world. It includes a chapter on philosophers advising government bodies where compromise may be especially necessary. Final chapter deals with the whole idea of using what are called intuitive moral judgments, finding principles that underlie and that perhaps may justify these judgments. One of the benefits of a book of self-contained essays is that the reader can pick and choose which essays to read and the order in which to read them. I hope you'll read the book, and I hope you enjoy the freedom that I think this format affords the reader. Thank you.